Hi everyone, I've just brought another video for you guys, so let's get started without further ado. Also, remember to like and comment. Tell me which manhwa you'd like me to cover next. Let's do this. The insult was brutal and immediate. The guard barely had time to process the aggressiveness of the obscene gesture that was rubbed in his face with such intensity. Meanwhile, more experienced adventurers watched the scene with disdain. To them, this type of behavior was typical of amateurs who didn't know how to behave. The humiliation continued in the middle of the crowd. In the public's eyes, this display was nothing but trash, as irrelevant as a distracted child. The young man ended up isolated in the center of the square. The surrounding murmur indicated that he had become the focus of attention for the wrong reasons. Frustration made him clench his teeth tightly. The pressure of the moment was becoming unbearable. The young man's face twisted in pure fury. He was at the limit of his patience, about to explode in front of everyone. All this happened under the radiant light of a perfect day in the castle city, a cruel contrast to the protagonist's stormy mood. Unable to contain himself any longer, he opened his mouth and let out a scream that had been stuck in his throat. With tears of indignation in his eyes, the adventurer raised his basic sword, deeply regretting the situation he was in. He began to curse loudly in the middle of the street, waving the weapon clumsily, while pedestrians questioned the sanity of that out-of-control young man. Desperate for some kind of validation, the young man brandished the blade in front of a stranger, shouting insistently about the value of his humble equipment. The figure in front of him, however, remained serene. An aura of calm emanated from her, contrasting with the chaos he brought. The young man's posture crumbled instantly. Faced with the mage equipped with high-level items, he realized the insignificance of his own weapon. It was then that her presence was fully revealed. She radiated her own light, dressed in magnificent garments that denoted superior power and elegance. All the adventurer's anger evaporated in a second. With his face flushed and his heart racing, he stammered a response, completely disarmed by her beauty. The mage smiled disarmingly, excitedly suggesting that they form a party right there. The adventurer froze, caught completely off guard by the stranger's sudden and kind offer. All his previous anger evaporated in an instant, replaced by a childish and dazzled joy. The scene changed to the tranquility of a forest, where sunlight filtered through the trees. As they walked, she showered him with compliments, inflating the young man's ego with every step he took. Feeling like the protagonist of the story, the young man posed confidently, believing that he was leading the situation. The girl just kept smiling, maintaining her sweet and seemingly harmless demeanor. However, that perfect fantasy was suddenly interrupted by a brutal shock of reality. The forest disappeared, giving way to the coldness of the crates and barrels of a city alley. Blue lights enveloped the young man's body as he materialized back to the point of origin. A system message appeared before him, coldly confirming that his character had been revived. The young man remained silent for a moment, processing the humiliation of what had just happened. Unable to contain his frustration, he screamed in despair as he remembered his fatal destiny. The memory of the final blow, a huge wooden hammer coming down mercilessly, invaded his mind. That brutal attack had thrown him far away, ending his life in a single instant. The young adventurer decided to risk everything he had. With a brusque movement, he struck the metal, seeking to strengthen his equipment. The tension of the moment was palpable. He clenched his teeth tightly, desperately hoping that luck would be on his side. However, fate was cruel. The system coldly informed him that the improvement had failed and his weapon was destroyed in the process. The young man stood paralyzed, with an empty look. The shock of the sudden loss left him momentarily without reaction, but he refused to accept total defeat. There was still a piece of armor on his arm, and he wouldn't give up now. Ignoring the risk, he tried again. Fury and despair guided his arm in another attempt to improve. The sound of consecutive failures echoed repeatedly through the alley, marking the rhythm of his complete ruin. The result was catastrophic. The adventurer ended up sitting on the ground, surrounded by the wreckage of his items, with only his underwear and the hammer left. The frustration was so great that his mind gave way. He began to laugh and cry at the same time, bordering on insanity in the face of the loss. Suddenly, his hysterical crisis ceased. something in the atmosphere changed drastically, diverting his attention from his own disgrace. Dread immediately took over his expression. He looked at the horizon, trembling and sweating at what he saw. The world seemed to be ending. The sky split into flames, and the continent itself began to break into gigantic pieces. He remained motionless amidst the chaos. Holding his useless hammer, the young man watched the apocalyptic destruction, feeling small and helpless. Then, an absurd message appeared before him. The system accused him of killing a player with his attack, increasing his infamy. The guilt notifications multiplied frantically. The adventurer realized, stunned, that the responsibility for the catastrophe was being attributed to him. The protagonist's mind finally gave way under the pressure of utter failure. Before the blinding light, his posture relaxed, not in peace, but in a total collapse of sanity. A manic, uncontrollable laugh escaped his throat. The sound echoed the fragmented state of his psyche, turning despair into pure hysteria. Stripped of all his armor and dignity, the young man remained sitting on the stones of the street. All that remained in his hands was a piece of wood, the only possession that had not been destroyed. However, fate played an ironic trick. That useless object now radiated an absurd energy, having reached the maximum level of enhancement against all odds. The adventurer felt the power of that unlikely achievement. A confident and dangerous smile lit up his face. Madness had given way to a sense of omnipotence. Amidst the delirium, he recalled his true nature. The young man knew that in that world, his existence followed different rules than common reality. He reflected on what had just happened. The discrepancy between his fragile appearance and the hidden power he now held was something only he understood. The system interface glowed, confirming the magnitude of his feat. That symbol represented a force that defied the logic of the game. The day was clear and the city seemed peaceful. However, the voices around him mockingly questioned what someone could do carrying only a piece of wood. Ignoring the ridiculousness of his situation, the protagonist marched down the main street. Wearing only a cape over his underwear, he walked with the authority of a king. His expression became unreadable. The previous euphoria disappeared, replaced by a focused coldness as he advanced without caring about the judgment of others. His determined walk, however, was interrupted. He collided directly with a burly man blocking the way, stopping abruptly. The bald giant immediately felt offended. The vein in his forehead pulsed with anger as he stared at the half-naked boy who dared to bump into him. The reaction was violent and immediate. The man grabbed the young man's cloak with brute force, demanding satisfaction for the supposed disrespect. The sudden outburst of aggression startled the passers-by. A nearby woman recoiled in shock, not understanding what was about to happen. A sudden burst of golden energy erupted on the spot, catching everyone by surprise with its overwhelming intensity. The column of light ascended violently to the skies, parting the clouds and announcing a power that could not be ignored by the city. When the flash subsided, the young man remained standing, holding his wooden log. The nearby passerby recoiled, stunned by what she had just witnessed. The calm, however, was short-lived. The burly man, feeling disrespected by the previous collision, grabbed the boy by the collar, aggressively questioning his attention. Despite the size difference and the imminent threat, the adventurer showed no fear. He just kept his head held high, indifferent to the other's fury. The young man prepared to respond, not with apologies, but with an attitude that defied the logic of that situation. With a quick movement, he used the log to block and counterattack. The impact made the aggressor's body vibrate, caught completely off guard by the force of the blow. The shock was instantaneous. The burly man's eye widened, the belated realization that he had severely underestimated his opponent taking over him. A smile of pure satisfaction appeared on the protagonist's face. He knew that the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Bathed in a divine aura, the young man declared his absolute supremacy. He now saw himself as the center of that universe, the untouchable protagonist of the story. However, the technical reality of his equipment soon demanded attention. The weapon in his hands, however powerful it seemed, had severe physical limitations. The boy maintained his victorious pose, his eyes shining with the confidence of someone who had just humiliated a stronger opponent. But his arrogance was abruptly interrupted by a system alert. The red notification warned of the critical state of his weapon's durability, breaking the mood of triumph. The item, despite its absurd level, was about to shatter. The common wood could no longer withstand the stress of being used as a legendary weapon. The young man's expression transformed into pure shock and disbelief. The fear of losing his only trump card instantly replaced his unwavering confidence. The sun shone high over the city, illuminating the peaceful buildings on a day that seemed perfect for anyone, except him. Hidden in the shadows of a narrow alley, the young man curled up in a fetal position, trying to disappear from existence. His body trembled, and cold sweat dripped down as the shame and trauma of recent events weighed on his mind. Before him, the source of his absurd power shone with a golden light, mocking his current situation. He stared at the basic weapon lying on the ground, reading its pathetic stats and the durability that was hanging by a thread. Frustration exploded, making him thrash on the ground like a tantruming child in the face of this world's injustice. Exhausted by the fit of rage, he ended up prostrate on his back, resigned to his own misfortune under the open sky. However, as he stared into nothingness, the defeated expression on his face slowly began to change. He jumped to his feet, the cloak covering his nakedness, as a different posture took over his body. A dark whisper escaped his lips, laden with an aura that darkened the environment around him. The protagonist raised his face, revealing a sharp look and a smile of pure arrogance and confidence. Before him, a colossal monstrosity arose, thundering threats about the insignificance of mortals and imminent despair. The gigantic creature, however, interrupted its speech, visibly confused by what it saw down below. The young man showed no fear. On the contrary, he responded with the calmness of someone who already knew the outcome. Alone on a mountain of skulls, he pointed his simple wooden stick directly at the face of death. The young man raised his improvised weapon, preparing to strike a blow. There was no hesitation in his movement, only the firm intention to attack. However, his expression changed in an instant. Shock took over his face as he realized the true nature of what stood before him. A colossal monstrosity emerged from the shadows, emanating a terrifying aura and revealing fangs capable of crushing anything. However, it was the gigantic beast that recoiled, nervous. To everyone's surprise, the monster seemed intimidated by the mere presence of the small human. The adventurer, far from feeling fear, showed pure irritation. He scratched his head, impatient with the creature's interruption. The beast hesitated, unable to comprehend the audacity of that tiny being. Fear began to show in its defensive posture. Confused and frightened, the creature questioned the identity of its opponent. Sensing that this human was not ordinary, the young man ignored the question with disdain. Demanding that the monster stop bothering him and die quickly, he brought down his staff without mercy. The impact was devastating. The force of the blow resonated through the desolate landscape, making the ground tremble under the violence of the attack. The colossal beast collapsed, groaning in pain. That simple piece of wood had caused devastating damage, subduing the giant. The monster lay defeated on the sea of skulls. The young man observed his work, the difference in size irrelevant in the face of his brute strength. Despite the easy victory, the boy sighed with regret. He lamented his current situation, wishing things were different. Suddenly, the creature's eye glowed in the darkness. Consciousness still resided in that massive body, picking up the young man's words. Trying to establish a connection, the monster used its last strength to respond to the human's lament. The young man stopped immediately. Something in those words caught his attention, causing him to stop walking and look back. The young adventurer observed the scene after the combat, maintaining his vigilant stance. The battle seemed over, but the silence was suddenly broken. A system window appeared in the air, surprising him. The two-headed dragon, Eurus, offered a solemn contract, wishing to surrender his own soul to the victor. That proposal caught the boy off guard. He frowned, confused by the sudden offer from the creature he had just subdued. The colossal monstrosity, although defeated, tried to establish communication. Its voice echoed, seeking to negotiate its existence in a new way. The young man, however, had no patience for riddles. He interrupted the entity abruptly, demanding to know exactly what this pact was about. Coldly, he ordered a simplified explanation. The creature, once terrifying, now trembled with fear and agreed hastily, desperate to please its new master. Urus illustrated the mystical process with projected images. He would transfer his vital essence, converting his monstrous body and soul into a weapon for the human. The result would be a sword endowed with an ego, a conscious and magical blade forged from the beast's sacrifice, promising immense power. The adventurer's eyes widened in shock. He immediately realized the magnitude and rarity of what was being offered there. The beast declared proudly that it would become the strongest weapon in that world. However, the young man couldn't help but laugh, finding the claim ridiculous. The scornful reaction made the creature recoil, visibly disconcerted. It did not expect its supreme offer to be received with such disdain. The dragon tried to laugh nervously to break the tension, sweating profusely. The uncertainty about its fate increased in the face of the boy's unpredictable posture, but the young man burst into a maniacal laugh that echoed through the battlefield. The sound carried a dark amusement that made the beast tremble even more. A distorted smile took over his face. He realized that this unexpected event would drastically alter the course of the story he knew. The perfect opportunity had arisen. With an insane gleam in his eye, the protagonist understood that he now possessed the ideal tool to realize his revenge. Without hesitating for even a second, the protagonist pressed the accept button. A manic, twisted smile plastered his face, demonstrating his complete willingness to carry out that insane pact. Immediately, reality reacted to his choice. The colossal body of the monstrosity began to unravel, dissolving into particles of light and mystical energy before the adventurer. The young man watched the phenomenon with obvious satisfaction. A predatory smile appeared on his lips as he awaited the reward promised by the brutal battle he had just won. Soon, the light ceased, leaving him alone in the vastness. He stood on a field covered with countless skulls, the only living being in that domain of death. Silence weighed heavily on the desolate environment. The adventurer maintained his position, feeling the atmosphere change as the essence of the defeated creature prepared to return. Dense shadows began to sprout from the ground around him. The beast's residual energy had not completely disappeared. It was reforming to fulfill the contract. A grotesque spectral figure emerged from the darkness. The entity's soul, still consumed by rancor and distorted loyalty, manifested, crying out for revenge in the name of its master. The spirit, revealing itself to be the essence of Urus, roared furiously. Even during the metamorphosis to become an object, the creature screamed its desire for retribution against those who had defied it. The protagonist faced the manifestation without flinching. As the dark energy swirled and condensed, the entity's cries for revenge echoed, sealing the fate of its new form. That cry for revenge seemed to resonate with the outside world. Far away, an authority figure, the leader of the World Union Guild, imposed his will with commanding shouts. This leader controlled a terrifying military power. Armies of knights in polished armor marched under unified banners, representing the absolute order of that world. The ranks of soldiers stretched to the horizon. It was an overwhelming force, organized and ready to hunt down any threat that dared to challenge the guild's authority. And the target of all this mobilization was precisely him. The young man's face was plastered on wanted posters with an astronomical reward, marking him as a public enemy of inestimable value. Back in the field of bones, the transformation was finally complete. The powerful soul of Urus condensed into a physical object, a simple wooden stick, but endowed with its own consciousness and infinite durability. The adventurer held his new weapon with an indecipherable expression. He observed the sentient piece of wood, processing the absurd reality of having obtained a divine-grade item with such a ridiculous appearance. A wide, disturbing smile took over the young man's face, revealing his twisted satisfaction. Alone in the alley, he laughed maniacally to himself. Despite being half-naked, he held his new weapon with unwavering pride. Suddenly, the wood in his hands came to life. The boy recoiled in absolute shock when a head emerged from the staff itself. The panic was immediate, and he screamed, incredulous. He didn't expect the inanimate object to retain the beast's consciousness. The little creature, however, seemed to enjoy its master's confusion, displaying a mischievous and confident smile. The adventurer stood still, mouth agape, unable to process the impossibility of what his eyes were witnessing. He compared the memory of the gigantic, terrifying beast with the small, comical figure in front of him. It was hard to believe they were the same being. The entity then detached itself from the weapon, floating in the air as it began to explain the conditions of this new shared existence. To demonstrate the nature of the bond, the being touched the boy's face. It became clear that only the protagonist could see and hear his new companion. The young man absorbed the information quickly, but his analytical mind soon detected a physical inconsistency in the creature's current form. He stared at the little demon, questioning what had happened to the rest of its original anatomy. The question about the whereabouts of the beast's other head was raised, seeking to understand the true extent of that metamorphosis. Before they could continue the debate, both of their attention was diverted by a piece of paper that slid gently through the air. The protagonist crouched down on the stone floor of the alley to pick up and examine the object that fate had placed in his path. Reality hit him hard. It was a wanted poster with his own face plastered on it, offering a fortune for his capture, dead or alive. The young man stared at the paper in his hands, confusion plastered on his face. The information before him seemed too absurd to process immediately. Suddenly, the reality of the situation fell upon him, literally. The sky was filled with a relentless rain of wanted posters, turning the city into a sea of notices about his capture. Ignoring the imminent chaos, the protagonist assumed an arrogant posture of confidence. With his new weapon over his shoulder and minimal clothing, he seemed to challenge the world to come and get him. The tension in the city was palpable. Locals and adventurers alike watched the notices plastered on the walls, whispering about the threat that had just arrived in the region. The value of the reward was astronomical, an amount capable of changing anyone's life. Those numbers confirmed that he was not just a target, but a top priority. The little demon, realizing the size of the problem, panicked completely. The creature screamed, terrified at the prospect of being hunted throughout the kingdom. While the spirit frantically listed the statistics and dangers they faced, the young man just walked on. He seemed much more interested in finishing his snack than in listening to the warnings. His indifference was as remarkable as his attire. Walking half-naked among the formally dressed citizens, the protagonist attracted looks of judgment and disbelief wherever he went. He tore off a piece of meat with his teeth, maintaining an expression of absolute boredom. Social pressure and mortal danger were not enough to spoil his meal. The little creature, seeing its master's total lack of urgency, simply gave up. The demon accepted that the end was near, already considering itself dead. The calm, however, was abruptly interrupted. An arrow cut through the air and snagged the edge of his cloak, a clear warning that the hunt had begun. Before him, a wall of steel formed. An army of armored knights blocked all escape routes, surrounding the lone adventurer with overwhelming force. Instead of backing down, the young man revealed his true nature. A maniacal, bloodthirsty grin tore across his face. He wasn't cornered. He was just starting to have fun. The world around him vanished in a flash of light. A devastating shockwave exploded from his position, unleashing a power that defied logic. The silence returned as quickly as the explosion. Where once stood a formidable army, now only scattered bodies and smoke remained, defeated in a single instant. The survivor coughed violently, tasting the metallic tang of blood. His body was shattered by the devastating impact of the previous attack. The pain was excruciating, but the fear was worse. Cold sweat trickled down his face as he tried to comprehend how he was still alive. Before him, the landscape had been erased. Where once there was an army, now there was only a scorched and silent earth under the vast sky. Shock paralyzed the elf. His eyes trembled as he witnessed the full extent of the annihilation caused by a single man. Ironically, the sun shone radiantly over the capital of the First Kingdom. The serenity of the sky contrasted cruelly with the destruction below. The approach of a shadow made his body react instinctively. He cowered, realizing that the one responsible for the massacre was right there. Terror took over his expression. He gritted his teeth, facing death head-on, powerless against that overwhelming power. Driven by despair, he refused to accept the end. His trembling hands frantically searched his robes for one last play. His fingers found the cold, smooth object. It was a summoning crystal, the only hope of turning the tables in that impossible situation. With a cry of effort, he crushed the gem in his hand. The magic was released instantly, answering his urgent call. Pillars of blue light erupted from the ground, illuminating the battlefield. The protagonist watched the scene indifferently, without trying to stop the ritual. Complex magic circles spread across the devastated land. The energy pulsed, opening portals to bring reinforcements from elsewhere. The survivor roared, channeling all his will to ensure the summoning was completed successfully. Rows of soldiers began to materialize within the light. A new battalion emerged from nothing, ready to fill the void left by the dead. Armored and perfectly aligned knights occupied the field. The kingdom's military authority had arrived en masse to confront the threat. The young man watched the magical light dissipate around him. Even in the face of the supernatural phenomenon, he maintained his composure, coldly analyzing the new threat that arose. Before him, endless rows of armored knights began to materialize. The summoned reinforcement filled every empty space on the battlefield with impeccable military discipline. In moments, the protagonist found himself completely surrounded. There was no visible escape route against that human wall that closed in a perfect circle around him. The World Union Guild had mobilized an overwhelming force. The sea of enemies stretched as far as the eye could see, isolating the adventurer in the center of the colossal formation. The scale of the confrontation became clear through the numbers. Approximately 3 million combatants were there, armed and ready to annihilate a single target. The massive summoning was complete, covering the vast plain to the foothills of the mountains. The assembled military power was enough to make entire nations tremble. An elven commander took the lead of the troops. With an authoritative gesture, he pointed directly at the young man, marking him as the enemy to be destroyed immediately. The leader shouted the order to attack with all the strength of his lungs. Fury and a desire for revenge were evident in his contorted expression as he commanded the offensive. Obeying the command, the vanguard of the army advanced in unison. Thousands of weapons were raised simultaneously, converging to crush the lone invader under their numerical weight. The young man, however, only let out a slight sigh. The approach of that gigantic horde did not seem to awaken in him any sign of fear or hesitation. He tightened his grip on his wooden weapon. The adventurer's gaze became sharp and serious, focused entirely on the movement he was about to execute. Chaos suddenly erupted among the enemy ranks. Armored bodies were violently thrown into the air, unable to resist the overwhelming force that struck them. The protagonist had only swung his staff. That simple sweeping motion generated a physical pressure capable of repelling the advancing army. His eyes glowed intensely as he completed the arc of the blow. The speed and force of the attack were such that the air seemed to distort around him. A golden shockwave tore through the earth and sky. The devastating attack swept away thousands of soldiers instantly, opening a huge scar in the enemy formation. The little demon was sweating cold, unable to process what he saw. To the creature, his master's attitude defied any common sense. Shock paralyzed the little being. The reality before his eyes seemed too absurd to be true, leaving him completely stunned. Ignoring the danger, the legion of knights began their charge. They advanced en masse, blindly trusting in the strength of their numbers. The battalion leader commanded the attack with a maniacal grin. Bloodlust drove his troops, eager to crush the lone target. Coming from the heavens, the soldiers fell upon the young man like a storm. Spears and swords were prepared to deliver the fatal blow in unison. However, the protagonist remained motionless in the center of the chaos. He held only a branch, treating the imminent threat with complete indifference. A confident smile curved the young man's lips. He gripped the piece of wood, ready to face the entire army with nothing but arrogance and brute strength. Suddenly, something interrupted his concentration. The boy's expression changed sharply as he perceived a new vibration in the air. Heavy footsteps made the earth tremble. The young man and his little companion watched as an overwhelming presence approached, overshadowing the previous army. The adventurer looked up, genuinely surprised. The sudden arrival of that entity completely changed the dynamics of the combat. His eyes locked onto the source of that power. He immediately realized that the situation had escalated to a new level. Enveloped in a divine light, the silhouette of a mage revealed itself. She walked through the battlefield with the authority of one who holds absolute power. The war scene transformed into a silent stage. With the army decimated at their feet, the two opponents remained alone under the golden light of the sunset. The young man stared at the newcomer with renewed intensity. The game was over. He knew that he now faced someone who would demand his full attention. The mage, in turn, simply smiled serenely. Her calm expression contrasted with the devastation around her, emanating an aura of unwavering control. The sun set over a vast plain. What was once a battlefield had now become a silent cemetery with millions of bodies. For the protagonist, that scene full of broken swords and death served only as the somber stage for their reunion. The mage observed the carnage with serenity. To her, all that destruction seemed like just a dramatic scene, devoid of real tragedy. The young adventurer fixed his gaze on the newcomer. The light of dusk reflected in his eyes as he assessed the threat. A shadow covered his face. He processed her casual attitude towards the massacre that had just occurred. She smiled casually and gestured, seeking his agreement on the theatricality of that bloody moment. The young man's hand tightened around the wooden staff with sudden force. The tension in his fingers betrayed that he was ready to react. He gritted his teeth, containing a mixture of frustration and caution in the face of that figure who mocked the situation. However, the tension soon transformed. A defiant and almost manic smile appeared on the protagonist's face as he faced his opponent. The woman remained there, with her immaculate clothes and elegant posture violently contrasting with the death around her. The two remained motionless among the scattered corpses. The silence of the battlefield only amplified the gravity of that confrontation. The mage seemed genuinely amused. Her expression was one of light joy, completely ignoring the weight of the war around her. She then addressed him with familiarity, revealing that this meeting in that specific place was already in her expectations. The young man maintained his composure and smiled back. He faced her with confidence, not letting himself be intimidated by her words. The mage's gaze softened even more. There was a disturbing and indecipherable serenity in her expression as she watched him. The young adventurer maintained his position, watching the newcomer cautiously. The dust from the battle was still settling, but he knew that the real danger had just emerged. The woman, however, did not seem interested in immediate violence. With a disconcerting calm, she declared that her intention there was just to talk, ignoring the tension in the air. Her next question was completely unexpected. Ignoring the bodies around them, she casually questioned the boy's appearance, as if they were at a social gathering. A satisfied smile lit up the mage's face. She seemed genuinely delighted with what she saw, demonstrating a disturbing pleasure in the situation. She continued to speak, expressing gratitude for the nature of her work. Her relaxed posture contrasted brutally with the lethal threat she represented. Her aura manifested visually, giving her an almost angelic appearance. She was not a simple combatant. She emanated a divine and untouchable authority. She hovered over the massacre with absolute indifference. The destruction and death around her did not seem to affect her, serving only as a stage for her triumphant entrance. Suddenly, the woman's expression changed. Something specific caught her attention, replacing her smile of superiority with genuine curiosity. The protagonist, in turn, remained focused. He did not let himself be carried away by her beauty or her words, remaining ready for the imminent combat. Frustration showed on the young man's face. Holding his improvised weapon tightly, he reacted with disbelief to his opponent's casual attitude. The dialogue was suddenly interrupted. A new presence made itself known, causing both combatants to stop and notice the change in the environment. The little demon linked to the boy's weapon awoke abruptly. The creature seemed alarmed, reacting instinctively to the dense magical energy in the area. The mage turned her attention to the young man's equipment. Her interest seemed to have shifted from the boy to the peculiar object he wielded. Meanwhile, far away, observers monitored the events with visible shock. The unfolding of the battle had taken a turn they did not foresee. The man scratched his head, completely confused. In front of the data screens, he tried to process the anomaly he had just witnessed, without finding a logical explanation. The young man put his hand to his head, trying to process the sudden change in atmosphere. Momentary confusion took over as the adrenaline wore off. He found himself isolated in the vast digital grid. The system confirmed that his previous target had been destroyed, leaving him alone in that artificial space. However, the solitude was short-lived. The blonde woman remained there, distant, posing a provocative question about what he would do next. A disturbing smile curved her lips. There was no fear in her expression, just a cruel amusement at the impasse. The protagonist turned, facing his opponent seriously. He knew that her relaxed posture hid an imminent danger. Silence hung between the two in the virtual setting. While he kept his guard up, she watched him with an unnerving calm. The digital horizon curved around them, creating an inescapable arena. There, only the will of the two combatants mattered. The boy remained still, calculating his options. The situation demanded caution, and he felt the weight of her gaze on him. Suddenly, the tension dissipated. He let out a short, mocking laugh, deciding not to be intimidated by her arrogance. The young man began to look around, ignoring her momentarily. He seemed to be looking for some flaw or hidden variable in the environment. The woman, however, made an observation that immediately caught his attention. Her warning carried a hidden meaning. A digital sound echoed as a system window appeared before him. The notification displayed a participant count that caught him by surprise. The woman's expression became even more sinister. She seemed to be aware of that information long before the system announced it. Shock showed in the protagonist's eyes. The reality of that count completely changed the rules of the confrontation. Instead of retreating, he responded with a maniacal smile. The revelation only awakened in him a wild excitement for the challenge to come. The mage couldn't contain her astonishment. The sudden change in the atmosphere left her visibly shaken and confused. The young man remained still in front of the system window. The digital battlefield seemed to wait in silence as he processed the information. She watched him cautiously, trying to decipher the boy's erratic behavior. The tension in the air was palpable. The adventurer held the piece of wood firmly. A maniacal and confident smile took over his expression. The weapon in question was just a dry branch with a single leaf. It seemed like a useless and ridiculous object for a fight of that magnitude. However, when testing the firmness of the object against his hand, he noticed something unexpected. That simple item possessed a surprising solidity. The tactile sensation brought up a mundane memory. For a brief moment, he remembered simpler, everyday times. Suddenly, the reality around them began to collapse. The mage looked up at the sky where gigantic shadows were plummeting towards them. A grotesque wall of monstrous beasts rose before the girl. The scale of the attack was terrifying, making her feel insignificant. A pillar of flames descended from the heavens, consuming the landscape with violence. That cataclysm marked the definitive end of the prelude to that story. When the dust settled, the young man was there, protecting them both with only his raised branch. The mage cowered behind him, in disbelief that they had survived. The girl put her hands to her head, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The situation defied all common sense and the logic she knew. She froze, her gaze fixed and trembling. The shock of survival prevented her from formulating any words. The protagonist, on the other hand, smiled serenely. The confidence on his face indicated that he finally understood the rules of that world. Wearing only his cloak and underwear, he rested the weapon on his shoulder with pride. His heroic posture contrasted absurdly with his sloppy appearance. The high-level mage froze, her gaze fixed on nothing. Her mind struggled to process the absurdity she had just witnessed, unable to accept the reality before her eyes. The initial shock soon gave way to absolute confusion. She tried to find any logic in their survival, but the boy's feat defied all the common sense she possessed. The disbelief turned into pure indignation. Unable to find words to express her frustration with that ridiculous situation, the woman responded with an obscene and furious gesture towards the young man. As the adventurer walked away calmly with his branch, the mage tried to compose herself. She spat on the ground, wiping away the dust from the battle and trying to regain her dignity after the scare. The protagonist, however, seemed to live in his own world. He walked with a carefree lightness, leaving behind a companion full of doubts about the sanity of the one who saved her. That apathy was reminiscent of the numbing routine of his original world. People focused on their own screens on public transport, oblivious to the reality around them, just as he was acting now in the face of danger. Back in that fantastic reality, the young man acted erratically. He greeted the empty air with a maniacal smile, leaving the little demon at his side completely confused by his master's bizarre behavior. The creature panicked when it saw the human simply lie down to rest in the midst of the chaos. The demon screamed and gestured, desperately trying to bring the boy back to reason, but was ignored. The mage, however, had already regained her composure and self-confidence. A slightly arrogant smile appeared on her face. indicating that she had a new plan in mind to deal with that eccentric. A system window suddenly appeared before the boy. He pointed to himself, shocked by the formal invitation to join the woman's group, while the demon watched the notification open-mouthed. The warrior awaited the response with a haughty and expectant posture. She knew her offer was valuable and patiently waited for the adventurer to accept her invitation to the team. The scene shifted to the outskirts of the border village. The dense vegetation and rock formations hid threats lurking in the shadows, far from the safety of civilization. Without hesitation, the pink-haired mage launched herself into combat. With a shout of effort, she focused all her energy into a direct punch, showing that she didn't need protection. Her fist collided violently against the monstrosity blocking the way. The impact was devastating, creating a visual shockwave that shook the environment and hit the surrounding enemies. The hybrid beast howled in agony from the unexpected blow. Blood spurted from its mouth as the creature recoiled, feeling for the first time the overwhelming strength of this new ally. The mage didn't hesitate. With a fluid movement, she delivered a powerful physical blow, throwing the creature away and proving that her strength didn't reside only in spells. However, the threat was far from over. Another colossal beast emerged right behind her, roaring with a primal fury and ready to crush the intruder. The attack was brutal, but predictable. The young warrior jumped nimbly, dodging the heavy charge while the monster only hit the empty ground. She landed lightly, letting out a sigh of boredom. For someone of her level, dealing with those creatures was an almost monotonous task, unworthy of real effort. The beasts tried to regroup, but her speed was superior. A blur of movement cut through the air as she prepared her offensive against the group. The monster realized the imminent danger too late. Terror was etched on its bestial face as it noticed that it had become the prey in that combat. With an impeccable technique, the mage brought her heel down in a devastating vertical kick, aiming to end the confrontation in a single decisive movement. Magic converged in the form of a blue energy dragon. The impact of the special technique crushed the enemy against the ground with overwhelming pressure. The other creatures watched the scene, paralyzed. Shock replaced aggressiveness as they witnessed the destructive power of that human. The little demon, watching everything, panicked. He shouted a desperate warning about the approach of something terrible on the battlefield. The young adventurer, however, just smiled. There was a malicious satisfaction on his face, as if that chaos was exactly what he wanted to test. The remaining beasts looked up, frozen with fear. An intense light began to shine above them, announcing an inevitable destiny coming from the heavens. From space, a pillar of fire descended, tearing through the atmosphere. The celestial attack targeted the surface with surgical precision and catastrophic power. A divine entity, dressed strangely casually, manifested in the cosmos. His presence radiated a solar power, watching the unfolding events with a peaceful smile. The explosion consumed everything in a golden inferno. The impact swept the area, incinerating the monsters and leaving only scorched earth under the intense glow of the sun. The young idol began her interaction with a warm gesture. She seemed determined to leave behind any unpopularity from the past. Han Sarang shone brightly on stage. With her guitar in hand, she dominated the environment, radiating the energy of a true star. The praise for her historic achievement made her shy. She received congratulations for reaching first place for 14 consecutive weeks. Meanwhile, life went on at the high school. The day seemed peaceful in the vicinity of the campus. The media celebrated her unprecedented record. The singer's image and her 14 consecutive victories dominated the headlines. The statistics confirmed her absolute dominance. The score obtained far exceeded that of her competitors, guaranteeing her the top spot once again. During the interview, the host spared no praise. He highlighted the young woman's impressive achievement, maintaining a relaxed atmosphere in the studio. The interviewer continued the conversation with enthusiasm. He seemed genuinely interested in discovering more about the star's personal life. Han Sarang happily answered about her leisure moments. She revealed that she usually spent her free time alone at home. Suddenly, the topic of conversation caused general surprise. The mention of a mermaid left the host stunned and the singer visibly shy. She tried to get around the situation with a radiant smile. The young woman maintained her good humor, amused by the reaction her words caused. The host, however, was visibly shaken. He realized that they had discovered a secret hobby that the public was completely unaware of. The male audience reacted immediately to the revelation. Everyone blushed and was stupefied, captured by the unexpected charm of that secret. Far away, a woman watched the broadcast with interest. She found the idol's peculiar hobby quite curious. The spectator brought the cup to her lips, thoughtfully. That detail in the interview had captured her attention as she enjoyed her tea. The woman in the suit held her cup tightly, unable to hide her contempt for what she was hearing. To her, that person on the screen was nothing more than a cunning manipulator. While watching the interview on television, the mention of fairy tale books left her perplexed. That subject seemed ridiculous and suspicious to her critical ears. The focus, however, soon turned to the virtual reality equipment resting nearby. That silent device seemed to be the key to understanding the mystery. In the studio, the interview continued naturally under the bright lights. The host led the conversation, trying to unravel more about the famous artist's personal life. Han-sarang kept smiling, but something inside her trembled at the question. For a brief moment, the mask of the perfect idol threatened to fall. She continued her explanation, justifying how that hobby consumed a large part of her schedule. The host listened attentively, fascinated by her dedication. With an adorable and calculated gesture, the idol wrapped up the topic. That irresistible charm was her best weapon to avoid deeper questions and maintain her public image. However, the reality inside the virtual world was brutally different. There, delicacy gave way to aggressive vulgarity and grotesque facial expressions. Without any warning or provocation, she delivered a violent kick to the adventurer's rear. Physical aggression replaced any attempt at civilized dialogue at that moment. The young man, caught completely off guard by the impact, turned around in shock. He could hardly believe the audacity and lack of manners of that sudden attack. The pink-haired girl erupted in absolute fury. Her face twisted into a demonic expression as she screamed, releasing all her pent-up rage. The discussion quickly escalated into a childish, physical fight. Punches and kicks flew from both sides as they grappled awkwardly in the middle of the scene. Even the small demonic creature watched the scene visibly embarrassed. That chaotic and immature behavior was not what was expected of supposed heroes. The adventurer tried to protect himself, but the barrage of blows was relentless and painful. He found himself cornered by the unexpected ferocity of his companion. When the dust settled, the situation became even more absurd. Wearing only his cape and underwear, the young man screamed in unison with the girl, sealing that bizarre moment. The little demon ran in panic, desperately shouting for his captain. The creature seemed alarmed by the unfolding situation. The young adventurer, however, seemed annoyed by the imposed combat restriction. While he processed the frustration of having to restrain himself, his companion found the situation funny. The pair continued along the desolate landscape. The pink-haired girl led enthusiastically, commenting on her expectations, while the boy followed her, resigned in his meager attire. She then turned with a teasing smile. The young woman decided to break the ice by making fun of his appearance, questioning his name while mocking his underwear. The protagonist stared at her with a blank expression. He pondered whether it was worth responding to that provocation, or if he should simply ignore her impertinence. The mage stretched, laughing carelessly. Next to her, the boy's figure looked ridiculous in her eyes, but he just endured her eccentric behavior in silence. In the girl's mind, the reality was quite different. She imagined herself as a music idol, playing guitar surrounded by roses, turning the adventure into her own stage. The walk led them to the entrance of a dark cave. The place emanated a cold and silent aura, suggesting that this would be the next destination. They entered the darkness without hesitation. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the damp floor as the daylight faded behind them. The young woman looked around, eager to find enemies to face. The adventurer, right behind, sighed audibly, showing weariness at his companion's inexhaustible energy. A sinister shadow covered the boy's face. He forced a tight smile, reminding himself of the need to be patient, although his eyes revealed a dangerous, contained intention. As they walked through the depths of the cave, he finally questioned her attitude. The young man did not understand why she had asked his name, if the intention was just to mock him. However, they were not alone. Hooded figures watched from the shadows, awaiting the right moment as the pair approached their position. The leader of the hidden group revealed his presence with a predatory look. His eyes glowed red in the darkness, anticipating the confrontation with a cruel smile. The adventurer perceived the threat immediately and turned around alertly. The girl, still distracted fixing her hair, did not notice the danger that arose behind them. The group of hooded figures watched from above, pondering the best way to approach the intruders. Doubt lingered over whether they should act immediately. The leader, with a somber expression, assessed the situation. He seemed aware of the dangers that the dungeon hid beyond his own presence. Suddenly, a hybrid monstrosity emerged from the darkness. The beast's roar echoed through the cave, announcing an inevitable combat. The pink-haired girl quickly identified the threat. The system revealed that it was a considerably leveled bear rabbit ready to attack. With a dramatic gesture, the young woman launched an absurd command. The protagonist, caught by surprise by her attitude, found himself in the crossfire. While his companion kept her distance, the boy found himself unarmed and vulnerable. In a desperate act, he threw himself to the ground to reach a fallen branch. Panic took over the adventurer. He screamed as he realized that his life depended on that fragile and improvised movement. The beast advanced violently, displaying fangs capable of shredding any defense. Death seemed certain at that moment. However, the young man's expression twisted into a bizarre mixture of effort and terror. The situation was so critical that it bordered on the ridiculous. Wearing only underwear and a cape, he waved the stick frantically. His movements were so pathetic that the creature itself hesitated. The bear rabbit stared at the human in utter confusion. That erratic behavior and the insignificant weapon left the monster without an immediate reaction. Taking advantage of the opening, the protagonist struck with all his strength. The impact of the simple branch generated a surprising shockwave. The creature was thrown backwards violently, bleeding from the impact. The young man continued his movement, driven by the adrenaline of the moment. The colossal monster collapsed to the ground, emitting a groan of pain. Blood spread quickly, signaling the beast's defeat. The adventurer remained static, holding the victorious stick. He looked at the slain beast, shocked by the devastating power he had just demonstrated. The young adventurer flashed a confident smile, clearly pleased with the outcome of the recent battle. The tension from the previous combat had completely vanished from his face. His companion praised him enthusiastically, impressed by his growth and strength. While Panty accepted the flattery with pride, the little demon beside him just seemed to wish for the end of his own miserable existence. However, the celebration was abruptly cut short. The sound of a blade cutting through the air echoed, announcing a swift and dangerous surprise attack. The mage perceived the threat instantly. Her eyes widened in shock, catching the imminent danger even before it reached its target. The boy, however, was caught off guard. He felt a sharp tug on his clothes, paralyzing him in place with a sudden fright. A gray-haired warrior appeared behind him, positioning his sword threateningly against his neck. The man exuded an intimidating presence, easily dominating the young man. A sinister smile curved the attacker's lips. There was a sadistic satisfaction in his expression as he saw that his ambush had worked perfectly. The man held the blade steady, praising the boy's skill with a mocking tone. The girl watched the scene from a distance, momentarily helpless in the face of her friend's capture. She shouted indignantly, reacting with fury to the aggression. Panty, suffocated by the grip on his clothes, made a grotesque face as he struggled uselessly against the enemy's custody. The captor then revealed that he was not alone. Behind him, an organized group of warriors positioned themselves, blocking any escape route with arrogant postures. They were members of the Halasan Mountain Guild. The subordinates, identified as Mr. Choi and Mr. O, stared at the heroes with looks of superiority and malice. The revelation caused immediate shock in the girl. Panic took over her expression as she understood the gravity of the force that now surrounded them. The gray-haired leader observed her fear with obvious pleasure. He knew that the tactical and numerical advantage was entirely on his side at that moment. Without wasting time on negotiations, he pointed his finger towards the mage. The silent order was clear and imperative to his subordinates. Obeying the command, the band of mercenaries descended the slope in a full charge. They advanced against the girl, weapons in hand, initiating the attack without hesitation. The mage shouted an urgent warning, trying to keep the hostage away from the imminent danger. The young adventurer, however, just looked back, surprised by her concern amidst the chaos. Ignoring the numerical disadvantage, the sorceress assumed a firm combat stance. She was determined to face the entire gang alone, demonstrating complete confidence in her abilities. The mercenaries wasted no time and advanced. Wielding their blades, they attacked together, believing that their superior numbers would guarantee them an easy victory. Their confidence, however, was short-lived. Before they could complete the blow, a brutal and swift impact struck one of the aggressor's foreheads, stopping him instantly. Chaos took over the place. While the enemies were violently thrown around, the protagonist remained seated with his little demon, watching the one-sided beating as if he were a bored spectator. The boy closed his eyes, sighing at the situation. He realized that the fight was, in fact, a massacre, and felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. From his privileged position, he watched the inevitable outcome. The mage dominated the battlefield, knocking down one opponent after another with frightening precision. In a few moments, the confrontation was over. With the mercenaries groaning in pain on the ground, the young man confirmed that his assessment of her overwhelming strength was correct. The gray-haired leader watched the defeat of his men with a serious expression. The sudden change in the flow of battle required him to reassess the threat before him. Suddenly, a new presence manifested on the battlefield. A female figure with sharp claws emerged from the shadows, bringing with her an aura of lethal danger. The adventurer and his creature were stunned. They did not recognize that ability or the origin of the new combatant, realizing that the situation had become complicated. A delicate hand extended into the air. The subtle gesture carried enormous weight, indicating that a magical interaction or a pact was about to be sealed. The protagonist decided he could no longer stand idly by. He stood up, and even without proper combat attire, his posture changed, revealing a sudden and intense seriousness. An arrogant voice broke the silence. The newly arrived entity questioned the audacity of being wielded by someone who did not even understand her true nature and power. The mysterious woman wrapped around the boy, pressing a blade against him. However, her face displayed a flushed and disturbing smile, mixing mortal threat with a strange pleasure. The young adventurer froze, sweating cold. The situation had taken a completely unexpected and disconcerting turn before his eyes. The mysterious woman struck an adorable pose, completely breaking the tension of the battlefield with a sudden and displaced charm. A dark elf appeared before him, leaning on her weapon. She taunted him with affectionate words that sounded dangerously mocking. Her smile, however, hid a lethal intention. The amusement on her face was just the prelude to something much darker. Suddenly, a colossal monstrosity rose behind the elf, emanating a purple and oppressive aura that seemed to fill the entire environment. The creature's gigantic eye opened, shining with an ancient and terrifying energy that seemed to see through everything. The shock was immediate. The simple manifestation of that entity caused a paralyzing dread in those who witnessed the scene. However, the force turned against the summoner. The elf was violently thrown away, leaving the protagonist unharmed and confused. The chaos ceased suddenly, and a piece of wood fell heavily to the ground, landing near the boy's feet. The object looked like a common log, but a leaf attached to it shone with a singular light, indicating that it was not a simple piece of wood. The young man cautiously reached out. Something about that object drew him in, and he decided to hold it to examine it better. As soon as he wielded the wood, a system notification popped up. He had been officially recognized as the new owner of that peculiar weapon. The wood reacted immediately to his touch. With a small pop, a magical presence began to physically manifest from the trunk. A small demon emerged floating, visibly irritated and screaming, much smaller than the monstrous aura previously suggested. The adventurer stared at the creature in disbelief. The furious entity seemed to have overestimated its own powers in that reduced and comical form. The protagonist reached out, stroking the little demon's head. The creature, once a colossal threat, froze and stared wide-eyed at that sudden gesture of affection. The young adventurer smiled, continuing the caresses as if dealing with a harmless pet. The little being in turn blushed and remained static, unsure how to react to that forced domestication. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman watched the scene in utter shock. Sweat ran down her face as her mind struggled to process the absurd transformation she had just witnessed. She collapsed to the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably. The elven warrior seemed to have lost all composure, overwhelmed by fear and confusion at the boy's inexplicable power. The disbelief soon turned into frustration. She gritted her teeth tightly, refusing to accept that her ultimate invocation had been subdued and treated like a pet. Kneeling under the night sky, she questioned her own sanity. The aura she sensed didn't seem natural, leading her to wonder if she was facing a ghost or a far superior entity. Suddenly, an authoritative voice broke the silence. An older man appeared yelling, furious at her incompetence, while the protagonist watched the discord between the enemies in the background. The reprimand was severe and direct. The elf's body trembled even more as she heard the accusations about forgetting her mission, paralyzed by the intimidating presence of her superior. She lowered her head, hiding her face in the shadows. Shame seemed to consume her momentarily, silenced by the humiliating scolding she received in front of her target. The tension exploded into sudden movement. A pink-haired girl appeared out of nowhere, delivering a powerful kick that cut through the air, violently interrupting the conversation. The newcomer landed with an expression of pure fury. She gritted her teeth, ready to face anyone who threatened her allies, showing zero hesitation in entering the conflict. However, the elf quickly recovered her malice. A sinister smile curved her lips as she commented on the target's ferocity, seeming excited by the resistance presented. The confrontation scenario expanded. While the pink-haired girl maintained her defensive position, the bearded man and his hooded squad waited in the background, surrounding the group. The enemy leader finally revealed his intentions. He held two shining artifacts in his hands and smiled greedily, clearly pleased to have found opponents worthy of his toys. The pink-haired girl was not intimidated by the numerical disadvantage. She stared at the new threat with wide, defiant eyes, understanding that the real battle was just beginning. The pink-haired girl's attack failed miserably. She lost her balance in the air, surprised by the opponent's instantaneous reaction. The young adventurer just spun his piece of wood. The movement was fluid and controlled, preparing for the next step without any visible effort. With a simple counterattack, he threw the attacker away. The elf watched the scene, static, as the girl fell awkwardly to the ground. The protagonist assumed a threatening stance. With his face shadowed, he activated an ability, making it clear that the game was over. The elven commander, however, maintained her arrogance. Surrounded by her subordinates, she questioned the boy's attitude with a defiant smile. The young man was not intimidated. He responded curtly and directly, invoking the power needed to deal with the crowd. The elf found the situation hilarious. She laughed openly, completely underestimating the threat that was about to unfold before her. An explosion of energy swept the battlefield. The force of the impact was so great that it launched the soldiers into the air, while the commander remained motionless in the center of the chaos. The army was decimated in seconds. Bodies flew helplessly around the elf, who continued to smile, unperturbed by the destruction of her own men. However, her confidence began to waver. A drop of sweat ran down her face as she realized the true magnitude of the adventurer's power. Silence fell over the field, now filled with unconscious soldiers. The enemy's numerical strength had been neutralized with a single devastating attack. The elven commander tried to disguise her nervousness with a forced smile. She acknowledged the massacre, realizing that she was now the main target. The protagonist did not hesitate. He advanced with ferocity, bringing his weapon down in a brutal vertical blow, determined to crush the last resistance. With a maniacal look, the young man declared that all of this was his doing. The fury in his eyes indicated that he would not stop until the end. The blow connected violently. The elf, once untouchable, spat blood, feeling for the first time the crushing weight of imminent defeat. The young adventurer watched his fallen opponent. He had used a specific skill to ensure that the impact would neutralize her without taking her life. As the elf trembled on the ground, unable to move, the protagonist reflected on how the recent difficulties had strengthened his mind. However, he did not immediately lower his guard. His hand tightened its grip on the weapon's handle, causing the wood to crack under the pressure. With an intentionally maniacal expression, the young man raised the club once more, projecting an aura of pure intimidation over the defeated enemy. The elf, paralyzed by fear and pain, simply awaited the final blow, believing that her end had come. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the field, the pink-haired girl lay motionless on the grass, unconscious after the previous confrontation. Time passed until, slowly, she began to regain consciousness, opening her eyes with difficulty. With a start, the girl stood up, her heart racing and ready to resume the battle, unaware of how much time had passed. However, the scene she found was disconcerting. The young adventurer was sitting casually under a tree, asking if she had woken up yet. The girl stood frozen, unable to process the drastic change in atmosphere. Fear gave way to utter confusion at his calmness. The protagonist, ignoring her astonishment, continued to devour a huge piece of meat, nonchalantly recovering his energy. Still stunned, the pink-haired girl tried to formulate questions, seeking to understand why she had fainted and what had happened to the others. The young man just kept eating with his eyes closed, maintaining a serene expression and ignoring the panic in her voice. Without warning, he threw something in her direction. The girl reacted on instinct, catching the objects that flew towards her chest. Looking at her hands, she realized they were her gauntlets. The adventurer had returned her equipment, signaling the end of hostilities. The girl stared at the object in her hands, completely stunned. She couldn't understand why the enemy would return her weapon so casually after defeating her. The young man maintained his indifferent posture, as if the gesture of mercy meant nothing. She, on the other hand, remained frozen, trying to process that absurd and unexpected attitude. Meanwhile, the survivors of the massacre watched, helpless. The tension in the air was palpable, with the defeated allies awaiting the next move of the unpredictable adventurer. Suddenly, a soft melody cut through the silence of the battlefield. An elegant silhouette stood out against the moonlight, humming carelessly amidst the destruction. The beast man felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts screamed a warning of mortal danger coming from a direction he didn't expect. The mysterious figure continued her rhythmic approach. Each step was accompanied by that innocent humming, creating a disturbing contrast to the violence that saturated the environment. Without any warning, a beam of energy pierced the soldier's chest. The attack was so quick and lethal that there was barely time to understand the betrayal that had just occurred. Blood gushed from his mouth as life rapidly drained away. The shock in his eyes revealed that he never expected to be killed by someone who was supposed to be on his side. A satisfied smile curved the lips of the pink-haired girl. The sound of her companion's death seemed to be music to her ears, without any trace of remorse. The young adventurer watched the scene with a wry smile on his face. The brutal twist and the girl's cruelty piqued his interest, replacing his previous boredom with curiosity. She resumed her cheerful melody, completely ignoring the body she had just felled. The dissonance between her bouncy attitude and her murderous actions was absolute. The expression on her face remained serene and delicate. There was no hesitation in her movements, just a terrifying calm emanating from her figure. Her smile widened, radiant and artificially sweet. The innocence in her expression hid a psychotic lethality that had just been demonstrated to everyone present. Under the moonlight, she looked like a vision of purity and magical beauty. No one would suspect, just by appearance, that this angelic figure had just executed an ally in cold blood. With an enchanting gleam in her eyes and shimmering adornments, she positioned herself before the protagonist. The true and dangerous nature of that mage was beginning to reveal itself behind the mask of perfection.